Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is your boy Jarrell Mason, better known as Jay Mace, welcoming you to another edition of Beyond the Album Cover, where we get inside the entertainment industry with those in the know and give them their flowers while they're here to be celebrated. With me right now, I have a man that's a jack of all trades, master of none. You hear his voice regularly on Questlove Supreme. He's a producer. He is a man of all things, founder of the Sugar Network, host of EMOF on wild110.net. And we're going to get into all that and then some with the one, the only Suga Steve. Suga Steve, welcome to Beyond the Album Cover, sir.
Wow, thanks for having me on. You said jack of all trades, but master of none. Wow, I mean that's kind of insulting.
Yeah, you know, I hear the show and you're doing a little bit of everything. So we're going to get into all that and then some. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Tell us about your beginnings, where you were born, and what made you fall in love with music and wanting to get into the biz.
Wow, that's a big question. Born in upstate New York, and was exposed to music very early on, the way most people are, through the radio and through whatever their parents or siblings are listening to. And then I guess as most people in their teenage years start to develop their own tastes and their own preferences, so started listening to a lot of things at that point and continuing on. And most of my life I've been listening to music that was made, that was not contemporary to my life. Like, I guess in the 80s I was listening to stuff that was current, but other than that, most of my life I've been listening to music that came before me, you know, from the past and the distant past.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's been a main factor in what shaped my music listening and also my career. As far I forget the third thing you asked me, what got me into the music business.
Yes, sir.
Well, I was like a lot of people, somewhat directionless in my early 20s. Didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, and didn't really, at that point I was just music appreciation and record collector, things like that. I didn't realize that, and I didn't realize that if you weren't an artist, that there were other things you could do to make music your career. And I found out that I could go to engineering school and learn how to become an engineer, and that would get me into the studio. And that's really where I wanted to be, was in the studio where and when people were actually recording, because I found that to be the most interesting part. I think was to be present at the moment of creation or recording. And so that's what I did. I went to an engineering school here in New York City for about 9 months, learned the fundamentals, and they helped place me in an internship at Electric Lady Studios. And that's where I met a lot of the people that I'm still working with today.
Wow. So when you got placed at Electric Lady in the beginning, were you more like the gopher going out to get stuff when artists were coming into the session, or you were sitting and learning under the main engineer, learning how to edit, learning how to program mics and knowing, okay, this is what this should sound like, and just making sure that everything is right when a certain artist comes into the studio for that day?
Well, I started as an intern, so you don't have access to the rooms. You're not sitting in on any sessions when you're an intern. You're making runs and cleaning the bathrooms and things like that. But if you stick around, and if you get a chance to stay there, then sooner or later you end up as an assistant engineer, and you get to sit in the corner of the room and watch everybody work and learn by being in there and by watching. And then if you stick around long enough as an assistant, then you start to become an actual engineer and start to get your own sessions, mainly tracking stuff, is how you start tracking vocals and things like that. And but yeah, that's how it happens. Same old story. Just got to get in and then make a good impression and try and figure out a way to stick around, and obviously learn by watching and just being there. You know, it's the only way to do stuff. You got to be there.
Right, definitely on the job training. This was back during the era of analog technology when that was king, when you had reel to reels, you had the splice tape, the editing block. And let me tell you, people, you really had to have surgical precision in order to edit on reel to reels, because one wrong splice, you were going to be done for.
Yeah, well, like you said, I was it was still completely analog industry when I started, but only it was only a few years until digital audio and Pro Tools started to be real prominent in the studios. And so I had to, after learning all the fundamentals of analog and learning how to do all the things that you're saying, like editing, it very quickly became a digital situation most of the time. So I had to kind of relearn everything in the digital sense. It's all the same, obviously, except no razor blades.
Right. Yeah. I was like, man, I'm glad I missed out on analog because, like I said, one wrong edit, you were done for, because there was no way you could go in and undo the edit that you made, because one wrong cut, you were done and you had to re-record over and over. Because I can remember watching on YouTube, I believe it was Tony Moran from the Latin Rascals. He was explaining how they would do their edits when they would do their master mixes for the various radio stations in New York, and how they would separate what instrumentation that they were going to use based on the notes, and they would mark it with the greaser. So you really had to be super duper accurate.
Well, yeah. I mean, we weren't, you don't really edit 2-inch tape that much. And if you do, if that's really your master reel, you make a safety and in case you screw up the edit. But I was doing a lot of 1/2-inch editing on 1/2-inch tape, things like that. But yeah, like I said, quickly Pro Tools was there and everything became a lot easier. Um, and working with tape, just it's so expensive, and tapes are so heavy. And if you have to mail them somewhere, it's crazy. So there are obviously pros and cons to the turnover from analog to digital, but these days I'm back to working with analog again for my jazz label JMI.
Mhm. Now, speaking of JMI, why is it that you think a lot of people now, even though digital is very prominent, they still want that old warm sound of analog?
Well, I mean, the answer is in the question. It's an old warm sound, and especially if you're making vinyl records, which a lot of people are back to doing again as well. It all helps. It all feeds into if you're using tape, and if you're going to vinyl, then you're going to end up with a most most likely a warmer, more round kind of sound than you would get with digital. Digital can sometimes be somewhat brittle or uh, somewhat limited in its subsonic and supersonic frequencies and so forth. But yeah, it's, and plus, like you said, it's kind of old school. If it's fun, it's challenging in the sense that you really get a feel for what all the old engineers and producers had to deal with all those years.
Yeah, yeah, because you definitely see a lot of the vinyl re-releases when it's record store day, and back before streaming took over, that was pretty much all you had, was either your local mom and pop or your chain record store. So what was it like for you with the art of crate digging and going to try to find that exclusive record and trying to get in good with that record store owner to make sure that they put that record for you to the side to make sure that you had that exclusive?
What, on record store day or something?
Back when you were going record store shopping in your youth, when record stores were huge.
Yeah, I mean that's really if I'm a master of any of my trades, it would be that. It would be digging through the crates and researching things that I would want to get on vinyl. I have a really large record collection, and uh, I think it's important. I think it's important to be a student of the past and all as much as you can get to, as far as what's been released in the past, and collecting records and taking care of them. Also, I find, the records will be around after I'm gone, so I feel like I'm just a, a care. Uh, I'm just taking care of them while I'm here. So I like to take good care of the records, and and I think at the heart of every person who's in the music industry, regardless of what job they do, I think everybody is a music fan first, and a whatever they are second. I think you have to be, in order to be able to deal with this industry. You really have to not only love music, but love music history. And I would assume record collecting is part of that. It has been for me. But in answering your question, that's record shopping has always been my sort of escape. You get to go into a record store and just zone out, and just the rest of the world melt away. And it's just you and all this history, and um, it's it's an exciting feeling. What can I say? When you find something you've been looking for a while, or if you find a really nice copy of something, or an original kind of copy. And so that's always been one of my one of my escapes, is to go into the record stores. And I've I got really deep into it for a while. Whatever city I would go to when I was traveling, I would make sure I hit all the record stores and get a feel for it, and pick stuff up that may not be available in my city. And so it's really been a big part of my life, and a big part of the stuff I do when I'm in New York and when I'm traveling.
Right. And the art of crate digging kids is a science, and also it's where you first learn how to do the art of making a deal. Because let's say if a record costs a certain price, and if you only have X amount of dollars on you, you may be able to haggle with the owner or with the vendor. And if you're getting real good with the owner, maybe they can cut you a break. Now that varies. Now, the one thing that I do miss about the days when record stores were king was that you had the sense of community, because in addition to the record store owner, you also had your regulars that would come in, and then you all would chop it up about certain records that were in the store, and you would have listening parties for particular albums and discuss and debate. And it seems like you don't really have that communal experience now with digital and streaming, and everything is instant at the snap of a finger.
Hmm. Well, actually, I never really had that experience. I didn't talk to a lot of people when I'm record shopping. I like to be really, focused.
Right. Right.
So I don't usually do a lot of chit chatting, but yes, if you're getting good with the store owners and people that work there, they'll usually give you a discount if you're buying enough stuff, and they'll throw in some records and things like that. So yeah, that's always a part of it.
Right. So was it also kind of the feel too where you kind of hunched over a little bit in the rack just to make sure that somebody didn't see what you were getting, to make sure they didn't have that one up on you?
Not so much that. It's more of like I get bothered when people crowd me, like where they're like standing right next to me, and while I'm trying to, like, I want some elbow room. I don't want to feel claustrophobic and then I feel hurried because I feel like somebody else wants to come look through the rack that I'm in. So then I feel rushed and get uptight.
Right. You just want to have your own bubble. Now, what was it like for you with your first exposure to hip hop, and before mainstream really caught on and became the global phenomenon that it is today, where it's the world's most popular genre?
Uh, well, my first experience with hip hop was everybody's first experience with hip hop. It was The Message and Run DMC and Fat Boys. Um, I was really into that shit when it first came out, especially Fat Boys and Run DMC. I mean, that shit really blew me away. I don't know why, but then after that, I don't know when was that? Like early '80s, something like that.
Yeah, around that time frame.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. It seemed like after that, I definitely was into certain things, the Beasties, and Tribe, and uh, but I really fell off. Like I guess I went down my own road, with old rock and jazz, and um, I wasn't listening to a lot of. I just wasn't listening to a lot of contemporary music after a certain point. I think that point was like when I started smoking weed, and I just went in my own direction, and it was into the past, and I just wasn't listening to a lot of contemporary music until the mid '90s, when I ended up at Electric Lady, and I ended up around some of the great hip hop artists of our time, like Quest and Common and Jay Dilla and um, well, I mean, I was working with a lot of great art. I worked with Black Alicious, there.
Yeah, I heard of the name Black Delicious. Yes.
Yeah, that was a good session, and just that's when I kind of was like, okay, I hadn't heard much in like the previous 10 years of much of hip hop or where it had gone, and then suddenly I was right in the middle of where it was. D'Angelo, we're working on the Voodoo record, and I mean, that record has a lot of genres in it, but there's hip hop in it. And that record really helped me understand not just where hip hop was at the moment, but what was going on engineering wise, and how that kind of music was made. So it was all super interesting, especially since I wasn't like a hip hop expert in any sense. And then here I am working with Questlove, who's literally the hip hop expert. And over the last 25 years that I've been with him, obviously I've had kind of the greatest education anybody could have in hip hop. He's taught me everything that I had overlooked and not paid attention to, or had been ignoring. So I caught up. He caught me up. Let's just say that.
Right, because I hear that Questlove is a cultural curator, has an extensive collection of vinyl, Soul Train, and it's pretty much all for the culture. So, I grew up during the golden era of hip hop. I was born in '85, so being 5, 6, and 7 when a lot of those great era records came out. And this was back during the days when hip hop was very regionalized, where if it wasn't coming out of New York or LA, it wasn't getting airplay unless you were making some noise in your region and maybe you were getting a little bit of regional play. So what was it like for you to finally see that genre of music go from being regional to worldwide? And then how did your musical influences and other genres help sharpen your skills when engineering in the studio?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. I said I'll answer the second part first. Um, I think the reason that Questlove and I ended up working together for so long is that I'm not a hip hop expert, and I wasn't looking over his shoulder trying to figure out how he was making stuff, and um, I was coming from a whole different place, and coming with a lot of information about stuff that he wasn't familiar with, and I think is that I think that was a nice contrast that made it click, rather than hey, if I was some hip hop expert, he doesn't really need any of my information. He doesn't really need any of my input. He's got all that already. So I feel that was something that really uh, helped us in the studio, where he's coming from one set of ideas and or well multiple sets of ideas, and I'm coming from other multiple sets of ideas. So it wasn't too much crossover as far. I mean, there was crossover, but I just imagine that I imagine he might be like frustrated with you know an engineer who knew everything about hip hop. It just seems like it wouldn't have served him as well. So that's my thoughts on that. And I mean, I use all the tricks that I've heard on old records, jazz uh, or rock, just to name a couple that I incorporate into the way that I make hip hop records and the pieces that I contribute to it. And my own workers too. I'll these days I'll be making a rock record and I'll be incorporating hip hop engineering techniques to that. So it, goes in both directions.
Right. You mentioned earlier the late great Jay Dilla. Dan Sharnish just released a book, Dilla Time. Can you talk about just seeing him work and just his impact that he's had on hip hop and music in general?
Well, I'm only going to be repeating things that I've said before and things that everybody has said before, and Dan has pointed out in his great book about Dilla. It's really just met him a couple times, but once was in Electric Lady Studio A, and we were. It was the Water for Chocolate sessions, the Common record, and he was programming a beat on an MPC 2000, which happened to be my personal one. And everybody was like had surrounded him. Quest and Common and Common's manager Derek and Pino, and everybody was like a semicircle around Dilla watching him make this beat because they wanted to see how he did it. And I just remember being in the corner of the room as the assistant engineer, watching this and not really knowing who Dilla was at that point, and just thinking, wow, if all of these other incredible artists are like hovering over this one dude, trying to see how he's making his music, he must be doing something pretty special, pretty unique. So that's kind of when I was like, okay, I need to pay attention to this guy. And of course, I mean, Quest had been talking about him forever, but at that point, I'd only known those guys for a couple of years, so I still really was pretty green and pretty uh, oblivious to the 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 depth of talent that I was working with, and so yeah, and especially now after being with Quest so long, I've heard every Dilla beat at this point. We've re-recorded every Dilla beat at this point. It's really been Dilla's music has really been one of the main centerpieces of the stuff that I've worked on. I mean, Quest really, that's Dilla is his God, So it's and really it's not just Dilla's music, but all the other artists I've been mentioning that I've been able to work with. That's really been the biggest blessing of my career, is that the timing was such that I was able to somehow, without having any knowledge of their work prior, I somehow ended up with this incredible group of artists and who make this music that is so good, because I've been on sessions where the music's no good and it's just no fun, and so I've been around this incredible group making this incredible music for so long, so I'm pretty much just dancing all day long, which is a great way to spend your life.
Right, definitely that. And you mentioned D'Angelo and Voodoo. So coming off of the success of Brown Sugar, knowing that this next album got to be even better than Brown Sugar. So what was it like being in the studio, watching that all come together, and then seeing that album just take off and the legacy of D'Angelo, which I say to me, D'Angelo is like a hip hop version of Prince.
Well, I mean, I was on that session for many years, and I learned so much, and it's all due to Russell Elevato. If you know who that is, he's the engineer who actually engineered that record. I get a lot of credit for it, but Russ is the guy who actually did it. I was the assistant, and I engineered a little bit here and there, but just being there and watching Russ and D'Angelo and everybody else who was part of those sessions, but mainly those two, watching them work every day, um, knowing that we were doing something that was great and that people were waiting for, and we knew it was better than Brown Sugar. So that wasn't really a question. And it was everything. I mean, I learned everything. That was my first real extended gig as an assistant engineer, and went on for so long that I not only learned how to engineer, but I learned how to handle myself as on a session like that. I learned um how to deal with a lot of the realities of having this job and trying to trying to make your career happen and trying to keep your life together and things like that. But mostly, watching them to work. Russ being really one of the great engineers of our time, and D'Angelo clearly, although he doesn't put out nearly enough material, he's clearly one of the great singers and artists of our time as well. So watching those two guys work every day, it's just they're both very creative, and they're both real chill. It was a blessing. I mean, really, a huge break just to be the assistant engineer on that record, because it's such a timeless record.
Right. Definitely that. And how I want to know, when you're in the studio waiting for a session to begin, how do you deal with, let's say you get a call time to come in at a certain time, but artist A arrives X amount of hours late. So how do you fill in time until artist A comes in?
Um, I guess smoke a lot of weed and double check the signal flow. I don't know. You sit there.
So now, do most artists, when they book studios, they tend to black out where it's only for their private use, or is it where they can only do it in hourly increments?
Well, I'm not really involved in in that kind of scene anymore. I don't work for a studio. Um, but I think it's more. I mean, there are engineers that will um, block out a studio like on a yearly basis. I'm seeing that more, where somebody will just have a room for a whole year and they work on whatever projects they're working on in there. But as far as artists, I think it's more on a day-to-day basis at this point, unless you got some super budget, like where you can spend as much money as you want. But I don't think there are as many, lockouts like that anymore, where it's like months, weeks or months or anything like that.
Yeah, because I was pretty much looking at the Red Bull interview with Susan Rogers, who was Prince's engineer, and she was saying how she was literally pretty much on call 24/7 whenever Prince wanted to go record, because Prince always had that mindset of always keep the tapes rolling, never know when inspiration may strike, and it may need you at the drop of a dime.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on call for Questlove still. I have been for 25 years. But and I was on call for D'Angelo. I was on a salary once after Voodoo when we started working on Black Messiah in the early 2000s. I was on a salary basis for a while where it's just like any time of night or day you might have to go to the studio. But I don't know. I'm sure, and there's every type of thing now. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people who have that arrangement right now
Mhm.
with
And
with an artist.
yeah, and you mentioned Questlove. So what was it like seeing his rise, the Roots rise to where they are now with being the band for Fallon, and then Questlove just recently won the Oscar for Summer of Soul. Big ups to Questlove. So what was it like for you being up close and personal for that whole journey?
Watching Questlove's rise, I wasn't there for the first, I don't know what, 5 years of, where they really went from being completely unknown to, by the time I linked up with them at Electric Lady, they were already about to win their first Grammy. I kind of came on Things Fall Apart, Roots Come Alive, whatever year that was. Um, and and so but just even from that moment until now, yes, it's been like, I mean, they've just been on the rise for the last 30 years or so, kind of consistently. It's kind of amazing. And I mean, there's lots of amazing things about it. First of all, a band that stays together for 30 years, what's that all about? And then a band that continues to just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And now, like you said, Quest winning Oscars, and the band is on the Tonight Show last 13 years and all that. It's so, I mean, there's a lot of words to describe it, but I would have to say it's like reassuring in a way that if you put in the work and you put in the time, I mean, yeah, you got to be Questlove and Black Thought also, but you can be you can be at you can get to the top, and do it without selling out. So, that's really the trick. Um, is staying true to yourself and your brand, and trying to get there with credibility, rather than just trying to get there. And so it's been amazing. It's been really heartwarming to see more and more people recognize their talent and their dedication.
Mm-hmm. Definitely that. And when QLS was starting, were you hesitant to come on board?
Well, when it started, I was the engineer. I was recording it and editing it and mixing it. And I mean, I was on air talent as well from the get go, but it was too much to do. Really, it's a lot of stuff to do as far as mixing it and editing it and prepping it for broadcasts and all that, and it's taking up a lot of my time. So I ended up slowly dishing off all of those responsibilities to other people, and now I'm just a member of Team Supreme, who talks on the show. But no, whatever Questlove wants to do and make me a part of, I'm 100% in. The guy has done nothing but help me and support me, and with everything, with my own projects, with my personal life. It's, if he asks me to do something, it's going to be a yes.
Right, definitely a no-brainer, because I look at Questlove Supreme for me as one of the podcasts that I use as an inspiration for my podcast and for me to get better at my craft. So I personally want to thank you, Quest, Fonte, Laia, Unpaid Bill, for making me better, and doing what I do, you know.
Thank you. That's nice to say.
And what is your favorite QLS episode that is aired?
Well, the one I just did with Elvis Costello is not only my favorite, but the best episode of QLS ever. So I'd have to say that one. But if I were to say a different one, um, it's tough, man. There's been so many. There's been so many. Um, the one with Scarface, I think, was one of my favorites. It was a live one in Austin, and thought that was a good one.
Right. And I want to get you out of here on this. Can you talk about the Sugar Network?
The Sugar Network is it's like a community of music nerds. It's kind of like Questlove Supreme Jr. Can look at it that way. It's on Instagram. If you follow Suga Steve, I go live a lot and interview people, just like Jarrell is interviewing me right now, just talking about music most of the time. And it's been a long time, like 4.5 years. We've been around, and so we've been making a lot of friends and learning a lot. And it's kind of a little bit of everything. Everybody everybody goes live, does shows and series, and it's uh it's been amazing. Met a lot of people, and it's uh it's a great place to hang out if you're bored.
Right. It definitely a good place to drop in, learn some stuff, and get away from the stress of everyday life. So before we wrap, current projects, any shout outs you want to give, and also plug social medias, if any.
Oh, well, a lot of JMI projects. That's my jazz label that I co-own with Jake Cohen, and we've we've got a bunch of records coming out over the next 6 months. So any of those, you can check that out at jmirecordings.com. And the most recent project we did, I'm super excited about. The piano player Ray Angry, who's a member of the Roots, and we've done another record with him prior, but we just did a solo piano record with him, and it's going to be a three vinyl platter box set with a nice big extensive booklet in it, and I'm really excited about that. It's like a real old school kind of Keith Jarrett type release.
Nice.
Other than that, there's always stuff going on with the Roots, still working on their next record, and lots of stuff going on at the Tonight Show and QLS and Wow 110. It's a lot. There's a lot of stuff happening, and I'm thankful that you're out there enjoying yourself listening to it.
Yes, sir. And you can catch this interview on YouTube at Beyond the Album Cover, all streaming platforms. Follow the Facebook group, facebook.com/Beyond the Album Cover. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause and thank you for the one, the only Suga Steve for coming on to Beyond the Album Cover. Thank you, Suga Steve.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, sir.